And hello. Welcome to another episode of the KashCast, an interview-focused podcast interviewing creators about their life, backgrounds, and hobbies. I'm Adam Latour, and with me I have Walter Brandsema, also known as Turndownforwalt. Walt, how are you doing?
Hello, I'm doing well. Thanks for having me.
No problem. Thanks for coming on, honestly. So for those in the audience who might be like unfamiliar with your work or I guess like the Smash scene in general, how would you describe yourself?
Yeah, so I, by title, would say I'm the current director of content at Beast Coast, which is a esports gaming team on the East Coast, predominantly based in New York. Although a lot of our employees are kind of scattered all over the place right now. And then in terms of what I do for specifically Smash, which I would say is kind of my bread and butter for gaming content and what have you. Um, I do commentary in that space. A lot of where I came up was largely in content creation on YouTube. Turndownforwalt, my handle, is the name of my YouTube channel as well, and we're just passing about 80,000 subscribers there. So that's kind of where I gained a lot of my audience. Thank you, appreciate it.
Okay, so I guess like an immediate question I would say is that in terms of creating for YouTube, since I understand that you've been doing that for a while, specifically with more video essay like type content,
Mm-hmm.
with the rise, especially with the last couple of years of like short form media sites like TikTok, was it like challenging in order to adapt to a new format?
I think for me, in a way, yes, which is probably not the answer that most would expect to hear. I think when your career is kind of based on adapting with the times and like learning to create things in which you can in truth monetize pretty efficiently, because at the end of the day, especially for me now, and again, as like a very very brief background, this wasn't my full-time source of income for a very very long period of time. It was literally just a hobby for a period. I was an engineer
Right.
full-time, and then I worked on YouTube on the side. But pivoting into this as kind of the primary source of my income, it's really scary to be able to look at something and say like, well, this is something that's really going to shake up the dynamics of what we know as YouTube as a platform as a whole. And it can also just very significantly impact the amount of money that I can take home now that this is my full time career. So it
Right.
was definitely really scary to, I think, adjust to something like that. I think for me, I would selfishly say I lean a lot more into quote unquote traditional media, which is a
Mhm.
lot of, storytelling, driven content. Um, story first, show don't tell, that sort of thing.
Mhm.
And a lot of what early short form was, especially when TikTok was becoming more and more popular through the pandemic, was not that at all. I think it was really, really hard for me to swallow that type of pill and adjust into something where I'm like, this is something that I just very fundamentally don't agree with. But I do think that short form as a whole has a really good place and pocket, especially on YouTube. I appreciate it a lot. I like what I'm able to do with it, and I think some of the stuff that I've been able to do for my own content has been very good overall. But it was a huge adjustment for me to learn how to do something and compact it into something such a small period of time, which is just what I'm not used to at all.
Right, right. And honestly, okay, so first off, you actually ended up knocking one of my questions like very effectively already. So thank
Okay.
you for that. I'll come back to it in a bit, but immediately as someone who also does video, I wanted to ask like what is the average like pipeline for you? Like in order to like produce an average like well, you could go either or, like a more traditional narrative focused YouTube video versus a short form video. Like what's the process from start to finish and how long does that take?
Okay, yeah. So I will say the length of time is it really is what you make of it for sure. I think a thing that a lot of creatives tend to fall into, and it's not necessarily a bad thing at all, but it's just kind of the product of you're working on something that is your own and you're proud of it and you want to make sure you're presenting the best possible product you can. But because
Hmm.
of that, a lot of creatives, myself included, just fall into this trap of, oh, oops, I've sunk 100 hours into this project, and it's still the same exact project it was when I put 40 hours into it or whatever.
Yeah.
Um, and that's not necessarily me being like, cut your losses and just fucking make it. I'm sorry for swearing on that, but
Oh,
you
no,
know
no, no problem.
I think that a lot of people fall into this though. Like I talk a lot with different creators in not just Smash and Melee, but just YouTube space in general. And a
Hmm.
lot of people say like, I started this project with the intention of just having something to make for this week. And then it ended up turning into this huge, robust project where now I've been spending the greater part of this entire month working on it, for instance.
Yeah.
And it's not that uncommon. For me, I would say like I guess I could use my most recent video. I'm going to be releasing one this Wednesday actually. And that one
Ooh.
I would say from start to finish has probably taken me close to 1 to 2 full weeks of really sitting down and nailing on it. If I had to put an hour amount onto it, I didn't log my hours for this project, but I would say we are approaching closer to like 80-ish hours on this. And that's a
Wow.
lot of like planning the script. I'm happy to, for this project in particular, I did have a writer that I worked very closely with, but there is a kind of a producer overseeing element to that, which isn't exactly, I'm not writing it, but I have to oversee what this person says and make sure we kind of jive on how we want to move through our topics and everything along those lines.
Hmm.
And then there's the VO aspect. And then, of course, actually making the damn thing is pretty important too. So,
Yeah. But not all that's like so interesting, honestly. Obviously we are from two drastically different niches. But as someone who has like made and is currently in the process of getting back into making more narrative focused like, YouTube content, like I definitely I've been like editing for many years. So when I see like
mhm.
someone who does like stuff as flashy as you do, I not only respect it immensely, but also like, how does it work? Because I end up having to train myself on a lot of the Adobe suite just to get to
Right.
where I am now. And I'm still learning new things, actually, to be completely honest.
Yeah, I think it's a continuous learning process, and that's the reason why I liked it so much. It was
Hmm.
because, again, like I kind of briefly alluded to earlier, I started my career path as an engineer. I went to graduate school for biomedical engineering,
Ah,
um, and I had worked in industry in that field for close to 6 or 7 ish years, give or take. If I had to guess off the top of my head, probably closer to 6 years. And a lot of that work was in like implant development and manufacturing, for instance. But what I find really cool, and part of the reason creatively why I was so enticed into making the switch into this type of video work full time, was because I saw a ton of overlap between that and this type of creative work, as weird as it may sound, right? Like I think being an engineer and being an editor, which is what I was first before I kind of took on all these other hats of, director, producer, whatever else you want to call it. Um,
right.
I think that it was very interesting for me to see that type of continuous learning has a really clear overlap, especially from being an engineer and then going into this other path where it was kind of like there isn't one correct way to do it, but you can learn to do it in a way that works for you. And that applies to engineering and video work, I think.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Now, this will still build off of this discussion. Normally on this show, I guess I tend to flip flop between reserving Q&A segment versus incorporating them naturally.
Right.
So I'll just flow into the first question, which actually is from a friend of the show, Bash Dash 4. So
Okay, sweet.
it's yeah, so it's a little bit. So I'll just like read it verbatim, and you can just respond immediately after.
Okay.
So Bash says, before going full time to Melee content, you were a biomedical engineer. Hungrybox worked as a chemical engineer before doing Melee full time. I myself am in an electrical engineering PhD program and was surrounded by engineering, computer science, and mathematics majors in both the collegiate Melee programs I was involved in. Apart from the technical and expressive gameplay system that allows for innovation within a character's skill set, but also demands precise execution at the highest level, is there anything that attracts... Oh, pardon? Is there anything about Melee in particular that you think attracts those in STEM?
Wow, that's a really good question.
Yeah.
I think it is really weird and peculiar that a ton of people are in this. If it's not myself and Hungrybox as examples, it is really common for a lot of people in Melee to go down the pipeline of software engineer into, full-time Melee player or person of community.
Right.
I know I'm pretty confident like Zoo and Toph and a few other people, if I had to just name, rattle a couple off the top of my head, fell into that bucket for sure. I don't know. I mean, I think that the expressiveness and the seemingly infinite skill ceiling that the game provides to its player base is probably the reason why so many people in these fields are attracted to it, right? And maybe some of it is because, STEM majors are, a little bit masochistic and they want to hurt themselves as much as they can when they go to college and whatever. But they see a challenge, I think, is what I mean by that. And it's like, wow, this is a really cool problem that's been presented to me, and there isn't necessarily one correct answer to solve this. And that's a big reason why I liked Melee so much, was it's just like, this is an indefinitely expanding and infinitely possible game that can show you so many different things. There isn't one right way to do it. You can play for swag, you can play to be precise, you can play to be a nerd, whatever you want to be. You can kind of assume a different identity when you're in that game, and it isn't necessarily binary, right or wrong. You can develop and learn and kind of continue to improve in an infinite way, which is why I think so many people become attracted to the game. And I think similarly, people in STEM are probably like, yeah, for my career, whatever that ends up being, I get presented with these seemingly impossible problems, and I need to figure out a way that, one, works for me to be able to solve them, and two, works for whatever my end user is to be able to solve them as well. I think there's a ton of overlap in terms of that with Melee.
Wow. Well, definitely, Bash, since I know you're going to be listening to this, props for having such a great question. I myself, I don't know. I wouldn't necessarily call myself a STEM person. I do have somewhat of a background in it. I've always been like tinkering with technology to some degree.
Mm-hmm.
And when I was in high school, I was actually in a college level program that was basically teaching us Cisco networking. So I do have a certification in that.
Oh, that's awesome. Okay.
I ended up crashing and burning once I made it to my first college, when I realized that basically everything that I had learned in high school, they were not doing in college.
Okay.
But funny story, I was classmates with Sonic Fox for I think like 2 classes.
No way, that's insane. Oh
yes.
My God. Okay.
Yes, and funnily enough, because I are you familiar with Joji?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm fairly sure at that time, like, he was like a student at the same campus I was at. And I only know that when he was still making videos on Filthy Frank.
I was about to say, yeah, he was probably Filthy Frank back then too. That's crazy.
Yes.
Okay.
And he was still like filming in like some of the like areas, like empty classrooms and shit. I was like, wait a minute. Like that, I was literally there.
Right.
Wow. I never ran into
sick.
him, but yeah, I can definitely say Song Fox is a very, very nice person. I wish we kept in contact, but I wasn't necessarily into like fighting games at the time.
Mm-hmm.
But like nothing but good things to say about the person, of course.
Totally. That's awesome.
But now I'm sidetracked. My initial point is that I've always been someone to tinker with technology, and hell, like on the side, I'm trying to learn HTML and Java in order to make my own website. So I guess once the computer bug bites you at a young age, you're never fully, rid of it, even if you go down a different path.
Yeah.
But yeah, like the reason I got into Melee in general is because of Bash and, well, Awesome Sauce. We can get into that later. But yeah, I didn't originally grow up with the game, but I always knew of it. I think like the Wombo Combo video was like what, like a late 2000s thing, and so I think for me, not only being able to partake in not just a game but a culture that seemed inaccessible to me but was made accessible thanks to Slippy, but also being able to like show solidarity with one of my closest friends.
Right.
And honestly, I do think through that, I think it was a little bit of a character growth for me in order to like practice and like read up and stuff like that. I know it's definitely a bit of an in joke of the old tennis book mindset and everything with a lot of Melee players, but I do unironically feel back when I was like still actively like grinding, it definitely got me wanting to constantly improve, constantly learn more, and putting myself in new situations. I'm not going to say that playing a children's party game and do it for everyone, but it can be that for some people like you and I and Bash, and I think that's what makes games, which I do consider as art, interesting, because everyone will get like a different thing from it and will impact like other people and their lives and just how they define themselves in different ways.
100%.
So let's see. Oh, while we're on a Q&A tangent, I have another question from another friend of the show, Jairus Pat. And okay, so Jared has a couple, but they're all short. First question: who were your main inspirations when it came to how you approach your editing style?
Oh, I love this question because a lot of people ask me this, and the answer is for a Melee perspective, it was a channel called, I believe it was Ninja FX was his channel name at the time. And now I want to make sure, so I'm going to look right now. I think it's Ninja SSB, but the @ on YouTube is @Ninja FX still. He gets really mad when I bring this up because he's actually a friend of mine now, like a pretty, I would say a pretty close friend of mine, even though we haven't met in person yet, which is another cool caveat of the gaming communities. But
yeah.
Ninja was someone who, at least when I had started Turndownforwalt, but I did have a channel before Turndownforwalt that I worked on with an old friend from high school, actually. But that one didn't really go anywhere. And when I started Turndownforwalt, I watched a ton of videos from Ninja because he was making all of these really well-polished, crazy Melee highlight videos from different tournaments and whatnot. I think he's the same region as Axe as well in Arizona, so he had made a combo video for Axe as well. But the big thing that got me into doing that type of video production was he made a video called Harmony, which was this really sick, it was like a 10-minute long combo video with like great effects. It had awesome cinematics in it. It was like nothing I've ever seen before in Melee. And the reason that it attracted me so much was because before I had started making Melee videos, I was really into League of Legends edits and those types of games. But the difference between those two was that League actually had a pretty compatible camera tool that players could use to create their in-game cinematics, whereas Melee was, a game from 2001, which didn't have anything like that. So
right.
When I see this stuff from Ninja, it blew my mind. I was like, wow, this was exactly the type of editing that I wanted to learn how to do. And I think you could probably see it. I don't even know if they're still public on my channel anymore, but some of the first videos on my channel were combo videos for like Wobbles and Zoo and Abate and players like that. And it was really trying to tap into how can I make this a lot more cinematic than it really is. And that was where a lot of my style was driven from. So Ninja, he's a great guy. I love him. He's a homie for sure. And
Nice.
I would say that he was probably the biggest inspiration for me. And then the usual suspects of, Awesome Sauce was doing his thing back then. He was more of a compilations channel back when I started. All the big names in Melee, of course, like Scar and Toph, I think had their show back then as well. So just being able to kind of like get in the conversation with them was a big dream of mine.
Heck yeah. Okay, I will complete all of Jared's questions first because I could easily go into another discussion about editing style.
Okay.
So, question 2. Are there any other fields you've either wanted to go into or are looking to go into alongside Smash and journalism?
If the question is pertaining to games, yes and no, I would say. I'm really into other platform fighters, and I think my way in for a lot of these has been largely through commentary, actually, which is really convenient and nice.
Mm-hmm.
I love doing commentary, so I would say that's probably like my career answer for that type of question is if I could just be a commentator for a bunch of games, I would 100% do that because I just love doing it that much.
Right.
But I do think that it's a great way for me to kind of experiment with new games and really get into the culture of them. I've recently started doing Rivals 2 commentary. It's
Yeah,
been a
really looking
blast.
forward to that. Yeah.
Yeah, so I had a block for that at Genesis X, which was awesome. I think I'm also doing it at Collision in a couple weeks too, which is going to be really fun. Um,
Nice.
Pretty much any game I'm super open to doing commentary for. Trying to get into like Brawlhalla, for instance, as another platform fighter, which I think will be a lot of fun as well. And
Mm-hmm.
then I also do stuff like completely tangential to fighting games and video games. I do World Chase Tag commentary, so I think my answer to that is probably I would lean more into that and kind of use my voice and leverage my voice into something that I care about.
Hmm.
But in terms of being able to experiment with other games, I think as if I can play the game and it makes me feel the same way that Melee made me feel when I started playing that, then 100%.
Heck yeah. And finally, question 3. What is your dream project? Whether it be a documentary you're building up towards or just anything else you want to get out of your system when you're ready.
My dream project, there are a lot that go on the shelf, and I'm sure that's not a surprise to people who might watch my stuff or anyone else in this space.
Yeah.
It might be a little bit confusing for people uninitiated in video production to hear that, but as it turns out, making videos takes a lot of time, so it's hard to
Yeah.
be able to do everything you want to do. So that is a good question. I think one of the bigger projects that I had put on the back burner for a long time, and I'm actually kind of soft starting to come back to it, maybe in a more measured approach than the huge undertaking I had originally given to myself for it, was I
Mm-hmm.
wanted to do basically a full, robust, complete history of competitive Melee, from like the beginning to the end, whatever the end might be. The problem is that competitive Melee will never die, which is what many people will say.
Yeah.
Um, but also just like finding a really good narrative piece to close it out on has been a struggle. And then of course like the overall volume of work that is. I have to go back into the archives of 2003 competitive Melee as an example and be like, well, what the hell am I going to talk about for this? There's no
Yeah.
footage. I got to talk to the old heads of the game and see if they have anything like oh my gosh, what's his name now? I'm embarrassed that his name's escaping me. He was a legendary videographer back in the day, and I'll know it once we finish up here probably, and I'll kick myself for it. But just know that I know
Yeah.
who it is. But contacting people like that, getting interviews, for instance, and like really creating something that has a strong narrative through line is a huge undertaking. To do it for even 1 year is a lot, and that's kind of the way that I've been potentially starting to piece this out a little bit. But
Mm-hmm.
to do it across 20 is insane. And like the vision for it was to make this like a 10-hour video that's a huge series. I can break it up and serialize it into multiple episodes and things like that, but I don't want to
Yeah.
put the cart before the horse.
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely. I myself, let's see. And granted, like I have like a much different niche, obviously, in terms of
Sure.
animation. I remember starting my channel like when I was still in college, like going into the pandemic. And granted, I did dust this project off because it's been almost half a decade. I kind of it's one of those things where you kind of have to make it.
Mm-hmm.
So my personal project is because animation, anime, behind the scenes stuff is like a interest of mine. I was going to do a retrospective of the show Initial D and
Oh,
specifically
nice.
go into details about its first dub, which was done by a different company, had different dubbing policies, different voice actors, and you know, because with a lot of bad media, a lot of people are like, not only does it not deserve to be talked about, it doesn't deserve to be remembered. Which I disagree with, because sometimes it can make a good story. Sometimes we can learn things from bad media. Sometimes there are good aspects of bad media.
For sure.
Um, it's gonna be funnier if the more friends of the show I get to listen to this, because I had actually spent a while um like collecting all DVDs for a second season. Like I still do have. And then one of my friends, who's actually the moderator of the wikis, just gave me the footage for all the all the things. But as you can imagine, just doing something like that, like which would probably be like an hour and a half, with all the aspects I do want to go into, would be an undertaking. But it's one of those things where I definitely want to do it at the very least by the end of the year. That's why I'm personally slowly trying to get back into making things again.
Right.
The issue, and feel free to like let me know if you have like any like feedback, advice, or whatever, is slowly chipping away at longer projects while having shorter things to get out. Because I'm so passionate about my shorter ideas, they end up becoming longer ideas, and the snake eats itself and again.
Yeah. It's a tough balance to strike for anyone, really. I think you. This is what I mean when I say a lot of this is learning what needs to go on the shelf and what needs to be moved forward on. And
Mhm.
that list is just changing dynamically constantly, I think, for many people, myself included.
Yeah.
It's really hard to do, and I can tell you, at least for me, I've tried a similar approach of, I'm gonna, you know, chip away at this larger project but also work at the smaller ones concurrently with each other. But it's hard, especially in video work. I can't edit two videos at the same time, right? So it's like I have to pick
Right.
one and roll with it. And I think for this year, for me specifically, I've been making more of a concentrated effort at being like, I'm going to do this a lot more linearly. Like, this project comes first, and I'm not going to think about the next one until I'm done with this first one.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, that advice definitely sounds simple, but speaking from experience, I
Right.
know that will have like huge impact, honestly.
100%. Yep.
Oh man. I will say something that I'm glad that I was able to do, again, thanks to my friend Bash, is that I've been doing more. Yeah, honestly, around the same time as I started my YouTube channel, I think like for the past like 4 to 5 years, including this upcoming, well, past Genesis, I should say, me and Bash have been making little promo commercials, for the Smash and Splatoon scene. And the one that I ended up wrapping up with him, like in January, mind you, I think might have been my most involved project to date. It was my first time effectively working with live action footage.
Nice. Okay.
Ended up having to learn, very rudimentary how to like composite some VFX, just like track it with the camera and everything. Doing some motion graphics too in order to like match a pre-existing commercial. Very very particular VHS filters. I feel I was proud of that the most, honestly. But I'm always trying to do new things, honestly, and I'm just like, no, feel free to let me know if you've seen that, obviously, but I'm very proud about how that ended up and how we were able to coordinate ourselves despite obviously being on opposite ends of the country.
Right. I mean, that's amazing. That's the reason you do it, though, right? Is that feeling of pride and that you've accomplished something, and the goalposts are going to be different for every single person. But I think that's just wonderful to be able to feel like you've had something that you feel very accomplished in.
Yeah. And I remember when I was first trying to attend some locals, which obviously I haven't recently because job, busy life, all that. Um I remember running into another melee player of New York scene, John Fio, Horse Can Drive, and he
Oh,
actually.
horse. Oh my god. Okay.
Yeah, I'm like,
Real quick, we played a set at nightclub, and he was the nicest person to 2-0 me in a set where I
oh,
felt like I could have beaten him, and I was so salty about it, and he was just so nice after he beat me. But
oh yeah, yeah. Like I think he was like definitely like one of the first people that like I met when I was like trying to make a name for myself like in like my local scene. And also like, with his creative work, he actually like knew some of the people that I work with, or at least like the projects I do professionally. So that was also good. Because like I imagine the people who are keeping up with like this scene, even casually, and people who work in my field being animation, I think I might be one of the only people who's overlapping, to be honest. Uh, like probably more in terms of like traditional fighting games, but Smash, I honestly doubt. But yeah, no, John's great. No, I'm gonna have to reach out and get him on here as well. Um, but yeah, it was just like really, it just made me light up. Knowing that like someone had like actually seen that project that we had worked on. And I'm definitely gonna continue for as long as I can with these, just doing new things. Again, like having to learn After Effects at the most in depth that I've used at that point. What an experience on a potato laptop, I can tell you that much.
that's awesome.
Uh, but of course, you're my guest. Back to you. Oh, like another question we can transition to in terms of having a work-life balance, because you're still able to like play stuff like Melee for fun, but it's also your job. So like, how do you have like a healthy distance? Like, how are you able to just maintain that balance?
Yeah, I think this is a really good question from the perspective of what it was like when I was in my engineering job, because I
Mm-hmm.
don't think there was one, and that was a big motivator for me
Ah.
to make this change. Was the part that I was really struggling with when I was offered the position with Beast Coast was, and I had worked with Panda, of course, before I had joined Beast Coast, but that was on a part-time basis, so I was still working with Panda, producing for them, while also staying at my engineering job and working insane hours for that sort of job too,
Mm-hmm.
which was hard. And I think eventually it started to hit a point where I would describe my work weeks, and it would be me coming to my job, waking up at 6 a.m. every morning, getting up, driving to work. My commute at my first job was anywhere from 45 minutes to an hour plus to get to my location, both one way, and then
Damn.
work for a regular shift, maybe 8 hours, maybe closer to 10 some days, and
Mm.
then leave, come home, same commute, sit in the driveway, get home. I would try to maintain some level of healthy lifestyle where I would want to go to the gym after work. And a lot of it was like, I'm just going to go to the gym that's near my office so that I can avoid New York traffic, which was a whole other thing too when I lived in Long Island.
Yeah.
Um, so try to exercise, try to maintain relationships, like spend time with my family or my girlfriend or whoever. Um, and then like most nights it would be like dinner happens, 8 9 p.m. rolls around, and then I'm like, okay, time to edit. And I would just edit from 9 until probably like anywhere from midnight to 2 a.m., depending on the projects or how urgently I felt like these projects would have to come out. um,
Right.
as an example, I remember when all of the Nintendo drama was happening with the Big House Online getting shut down. We had
Yeah.
started this crazy effort, and I was the creative director for 5 Days of Melee, which was a 5 day long
Yeah.
telebroadcast where we put that together in under 2 weeks. But that was also happening alongside me working in my engineering job. So much of this was like burning the wick at both ends, but just like furiously fast. And I would
Oh man.
work Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. Friday, I would, finish my shift at the engineering job, basically be falling asleep on the drive home, and then just crawl into bed at like 5, 6 p.m. And I would wake up on Saturday, it'd be like 3 in the morning, and be like, well, well, damn, I don't know what happened with my day. But I was just
Wow.
obviously so tired, I had to go to bed. Um, so it was a struggle, I think, for a while of understanding what healthy work life balance was and what boundaries I needed to set on myself for that sort of thing. And I don't think a lot of people realize that. I think really intimate fans of what my channel was, especially when I was growing as quickly as I was in maybe like 2020, 2021, probably understood how much work went into it. But there was this very recurring comment once I had made the video that said, "Hey, I quit my engineering job. By the way, I was an engineer in case anyone didn't know that." And then a lot of people would be like, "The only thing I really got out of this was that, you were you were doing all of this stuff while also working, a full-time job at the same time, which is just an immense amount of effort." Um so it was like a really big struggle for me to be able to kind of like separate that. And then when presented with the Beast Coast offer, it was like, well, I'm making, I'd be making a lot less money, which was a big motivator for me at the time.
Yeah.
But I would also have all of that time back, which is really important to me.
Right.
Um, so ultimately, going and making that decision to do this, regardless of how long the tenure here or in this industry may be, I think was correct, because it definitely lowered my stress levels to practically a zero from the time that I left the engineering job and started doing this. And I think my work life balance has just become tremendously better as a result.
Yeah, I'm definitely happy to hear that. Like for me, honestly, so like traveling back to I want to say 2018, 2019, when I was still in college, I was involved in an internship program where well, I've went over this story many times on this
Mm.
show, like talking to people, but it's for causes I'm passionate about. At the time when I was doing an internship, a I was with an organization called Brooklyn Community Services. My major was human services, so social work and adjacent tasks relating to that.
Right.
So my specific thing was I was working in a rehabilitation program that had adults with special needs, and considering that my brother is also, one with special needs, I'm also very passionate about that. And it was only through that I was starting to just like hammer in like some of the traits that I would need to do what I'm currently, which is just being a PA in animation. But that like just took a lot of time, and because it wasn't far as in like taking a train, but it was still a very decent walk, and that was just obviously unpaid. So there were days where I had to like wake up early, come in early, work until like 12,
Right.
then walk all the way back, maybe have like an hour or two for lunch, and then just like do the rest of my classes, and then like maybe just have like an hour bit to like chill um in my college's anime club before I just clocked out. Then I think that's like maybe like 45 minutes on the train, walk all the way back to my folks'
Right.
apartment building, and then get back to any actual creative projects. And the fact that I was still able to make anything is a miracle in of itself. I end up learning like this podcast in of itself is just a remnant of, the quarantine rush, honestly. And then just like learning all these skills on the fly. And I'm obviously passionate about all the subjects I've discussed and the industry that I'm in, but you can imagine the distance that might be needed. I feel like, obviously I don't speak for everyone, but I imagine for a lot of people, there are people who are very passionate about the work that they do, and then there are other people who I even spoke to on this show, and now I'm finally getting it, who do not watch anything in their medium, let alone the show that they work on. once they finally clock off,
Right.
because you were so innately familiar with the thing that you made or helped make that you know the veneer is lost. Like even when I'm watching like a highly edited video, it's like, okay, so were they using Vegas, were they using Premiere or DaVinci Resolve, like what motion graphics asset are they using, stuff like that, nerd shit, but
Hmm.
you know but in reality, in spite of like all the stress, like I had mentioned earlier, you know, doing stuff like this is still something that I wouldn't have imagined with YouTube podcasting or my job. Something that if you had time traveled back and like talked to like 15-year-old or 10-year-old Adam, like this would still be insane that I'm doing all this. I can obviously do better, and I think you can agree. But the fact that we are like, well, you work with more people than me, but just being like one person studios, in a lack of a better expression,
Sure. Yeah.
is
Yeah.
it's just like gargantuan accomplishment, and sometimes you gotta absorb that. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think it's important to celebrate your victories like that too. Kind of circling back to what you were telling me before, like the overall goals for different people are different. And I think if you're feeling that you're able to achieve those regardless of what they may be, it's important that you celebrate them.
hmm Now, pivoting a bit more into Smash. Okay, so all right, I could go in multiple directions. First off, as someone who obviously is more adjacent to the scene than I am, the the release of Emp Lemon's video, "There Will Never Ever Be another player like Hungry Box." You obviously know what I'm talking about.
Yep.
I feel not only helped get me into the game, but like many others, as like other people, like the first big melee doc, et cetera, in the early 2010s. However, in the coming years, and I think like other users have made like no equivalent documentaries for Mango and Amza, um, there are there were like certain aspects of the documentary that are coming into more scrutiny, with like retrospect, obviously.
Sure.
Um, I guess what I want to ask is like, did you have any like opinions of that documentary when it first dropped, or has anything changed? In retrospect, you still like respect the no the gargantuan effort that it was. I'd just be interested in like hearing your thoughts.
Yeah, I think that video in particular was certainly a needle mover for the melee scene. Melee people are a little bit interesting in that I think I don't want to say look a gift horse in the mouth, excuse me, but
Mm-hmm.
a lot of the critiques that came from this video from the greater melee community were things like, oh, this is very harshly generalizing things that aren't true if you're endemic to melee, or these are things that are factually incorrect if you're endemic to melee, which I think were the biggest red flags for this video. Not
Right.
necessarily opinions that I hold on this video, because from my perspective as someone who cares more about telling a compelling story, I think it does that very well. Um, and like the idea of being able to tell a good story should take precedent, in my opinion, over having all of the facts right, quote unquote. I'm going to say quote unquote for that because obviously you should do your research and try to be as
Oh,
accurate as you can. But
absolutely.
that, yeah, I think to an extent, like some of it comes down to this is nitpicking in a way. And I think that if the outcome of a video like this results in more people becoming interested in the thing that we're all interested in, that is just unequivocally a good thing, in my opinion. Um,
Yes.
so, I mean, I've watched a lot of Emplemon's videos before. I think he's an excellent creator. He has very successfully fallen into the category on YouTube that I aspire to be at if I didn't love Melee so much, which is I just make videos about the thing that interests me at this moment in time which I think
Yeah.
rules. But yeah, I think it's great that a creator of his size was able to, shine a light on the competitive scene, and also in truth a player in the competitive scene in Hungrybox who is really often not appreciated for what his contributions were to the scene.
Hmm. I will say, obviously as a fan of EMP myself, even before the video essay days, I definitely agree with you. I definitely think you have a very strong point. Obviously, some of the more factual elements, or even some of the ways some of the opinions were delivered in that video may, age with time, but that is inevitable. And now especially we are in an age where the barrier for entry of making something of that caliber, at least like technology wise,
Yes.
is much lower. So obviously, people, instead of just solely criticizing, which people are still free to do, obviously, they can do their own. And the one creator who obviously their name escapes me, but they're a much smaller creator that made similar videos on Amza and a recent one on Mango that was a direct counter to the original Hungrybox video that Emp made.
Yes,
You
that
know,
is Flame is Lucky is the name of the YouTuber
yes,
for the Mango one, and then Awesome Sauce made the Amsa one.
yes, thank you. So yeah, like honestly, I feel like the fact that many people were able to talk about that video and even just like show that video to non-melee players or even people who are mystified with the concept of competitive gaming in general, and they still got it. And of
Mm-hmm.
course, props to Innuendo Studios as well. I'm not sure if you saw his melee video
Yep.
from many. Oh,
Big fan
of
of his.
course.
Yeah.
Yes. Very, very good. But yeah, like I'm all for analysis. I'm regardless of the subject. I'm all for people talking passionately, and even if it's a subject that has been previously covered, putting a perspective that couldn't be written or manufactured anywhere else. So I still think no matter how time progresses, like M's video will have a place, is not immune from criticism. But I feel like as the years go on, we are going to get much more, um, innovative content. It's just a stepping stone, and it still deserves to be acknowledged, even if like better videos will come in the future, and
Yeah.
they should.
100%. I think the word accessibility that you used is really important for that, right? Because anyone can open up Premiere or Vegas or DaVinci or whatever it is, your editor of choice, and put something together of this scope. It's about being able to learn how to create narrative story beats and tell a compelling story and all that stuff, which is more of a learned skill and something that you develop over time. But anyone can start, which is the important thing, and that's what I find really cool about this platform.
Absolutely. Do you have any, and this is just like me asking a question to you, but in terms of ironing out scripts, like making sure something still sounds natural but is still written competently as well, do you have any advice or do you have any resources that one could look into?
Yeah, I think for so this is a funny thing because one of my big goals in 2024, and I kind of alluded to this earlier in the show, is I've taken a step back from being someone who wants to do everything, and I'm really trying to narrow in a lot more on what I call like sure bets, or videos that I know in my heart of heart are good topics, good stories, and things that people will eventually care about one way or the other.
Mm-hmm.
So because of that, a lot of my production pipeline has shifted. Where in 2023, I'll say I've worked with a wide swath of different writers and editors, so that I could just produce a
Ah,
large volume of content. And even in the
right.
first quarter of this year alone, I've pulled that back a lot because a lot of it has become things that I either write, edit, and produce myself, or I have a much heavier hand in those steps of the process now. Whereas I took a little bit of a step back from that in 2023 and kind of let things drive itself and see where it went. Um,
Mm-hmm.
So I think in terms of how to shore up your writing for videos like this, the biggest thing, and I think even like Mr. Beast tweeted about this recently too, which I find funny and ironic in a way because Mr. Beast popularized and turned the Zoomer editing style into like a way of life for many people. And it's like, if you're not retention editing, you're an idiot and you have to do it my way because that's the only way you'll be successful on YouTube, which was never necessarily true, but he was definitely a person who popularized that type of editing or creation. I
Right.
think he recently said, like, I'm taking a step back and slowing things down and focusing more on the story. And I do think that's correct. There isn't one necessarily one size fits all way to approach it. Like, you can still be a Zoomer retention editor and you can still be a slower storyteller editor, or you can combine aspects of both and make your own way for something like that. But I do think that if you want to make your writing a little bit better and a little bit more compelling to a general viewer and something that sounds more natural to whatever your voice may be,
Mhm.
focusing on the story is really, really important.
All right, definitely. Okay, sorry for stumbling. I so my initial transition is that I definitely agree with your thoughts on editing style, and to finally call back to an earlier point I wanted to make. Um, my influences definitely in terms of editing go through like a wide span. You know, obviously, I think like Emp himself strikes a balance between visuals that can be engaging but not distracting. Like they both complement his writing. Like, you know, the visual in you know, his written and spoken word are like a yin and yang. Obviously, Awesome Sauce is like very flashy, and I think his visuals complement. And again, like sometimes, oh man, I just love the way he captures footage. But in like say like other media sources, for instance, I've continually been engaged with the work of Ross Scott of Freeman's Mind fame with his more scripted videos, and
Mm-hmm.
sometimes it's just captured footage, sometimes it's just him in front of a green screen, and he's such a good writer that I'm just thoroughly engaged. Like he doesn't need flashy assets. He'll just have like a hard cut to like another segment or a hard cut to just like another funny thing in the gameplay. And with the way that he tells the story, not just of him playing a game or him having an opinion on a piece of media, it just works.
Right.
Um, in terms of strictly visuals, though, I will always say um just the editing style of a lot of Toonami protos or promos I should say to this day have been just the interface has been so slick. I love the way that they're able to do hard cuts and expertly like time scenes to specific things, and having the perfect just like stock vocal clip from a completely different unrelated source,
Mm-hmm.
or just like tie it all together to a specific theme. I think that's like also incredibly strong. um Obviously you can tell my influences come from a wide path, and even though again other creators like Bent the Sage are, you know, much more plain visual presentation, but their written word takes higher precedent. I love just like deconstructing what other people do in their creative approaches. But of course, one shouldn't get caught up in my current predicament, which is being so engaged with this that you forget to have your own identity and just like putting yourself out there, which is definitely what the purpose of me you know, just producing more, including episodes of this show, is going to accomplish. I'm definitely very um I'm very optimistic for the future, and being able to have this new a new MO of like talking with fellow creatives outside my own industry is going to give just me and hopefully viewers in the audience just a new perspective in order to approach certain goals or hurdles that they might be facing. And I think that's going to be a great experience for people in general, I feel.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Oh man. Now I had one other question, but it's completely unrelated.
Okay.
Um, I don't know, maybe Patreon exclusive. So, so in light of, so as someone, first off, as someone who was working with some of the Genesis crew on that commercial, I think you're definitely well aware of some of Nintendo's recent rulings regarding no portraying their games in a competitive manner. And quite literally a few hours ago, they basically, well, they didn't actually sue the pants off Yuzu, but they won the court hearing against Yuzu and Citra as well. Um, First off, I guess like if you had like any opinions, and second, like has any of Nintendo's stuff, like their opinions or whatever, like impacted you? Because I know, I think for a while now you've had like not only wanting to highlight Melee and Ultimate, but P Plus as well, when more people were seeing how that game was treated.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just interested in like your thoughts on like everything.
Yeah. I mean,
Well,
I
what
think
you can say, obviously.
for sure, and I'm pretty open when it comes to this stuff. I think I don't think Nintendo as a company is the most in touch with their fans, which is really sad and upsetting, especially as someone who has devoted a large majority of their life to creating a career for myself out of this, and really being able to devote a lot of my life into something that I care about to this extent.
Mhm.
It's just disappointing, I think, overall is the answer I give to something like that. There have been a lot of situations where I don't think Nintendo is fully in touch with what the community wants, and for Melee specifically, it's really frustrating where this is a game that isn't even, sold on shelves at stores, where they're not gaining any revenue from it, and it's just a group of people that want to get together and play in a tournament or something like that. And we can go through and list off all the items of things where the Melee community might have felt that Nintendo has wronged them in one way or another, like Evo or the Big House Online, like I mentioned before, or even Genesis. Like I had coordinated a really big charity contribution effort called Gen Assist for that staff, where I don't even know if people remember that there was like a whole big issue with not being able to run their event at one point as well.
Yeah.
And I don't want to be misplacing words when it comes to talking about Nintendo, because it can be like a really dicey subject and whatnot. I do think a lot of this can be the product of poor communication between a lot of parties, for sure.
Mhm.
But it's hard, especially when, for someone like me, that poor communication resulted in jobs being lost for people that I care about, or
Yeah.
people not being able to run tournaments and getting six figure plus in the deep for having venues and what have you. It's really
Christ.
hard to not be disappointed in them just caring less about what we do. It's not even like the bare minimum is what most people will ask for. Like, please just care less. There was a clip of Scar, who is a pretty famous Melee commentator, who's like basically screaming at his stream, being like, I want to see a police officer come and tell us we can't play video games together. And I think that's just kind of like the overall community sentiment at this point, where it's just kind of like, well, why do people care this much that we want to get together and celebrate a game, especially when you juxtapose that against how a lot of other new age developers react to people being like that. I mean, so many different games have been built off the back of super fans making mods off of it, right? Like all the entire MOBA genre as a video game. It's just incredible and crazy to see. But
obviously Sonic Mania too, of course.
Yeah, of course. And I think like the that juxtaposition of those being put together is just kind of like laughable to me, to be like, well, you as a company who has the tenure and experience and love from millions, billions of people that you have, to be able to look at this one small microcosm of a thing and be like, well, I don't like that. It's just really frustrating, I think, to a lot of people who have devoted so much of their lives and created an identity and really found their home in appreciating a game like this. And that's the part that really upsets me about it.
Definitely. There's a huge contrast between cases like, people originally developing a fan-made Resident Evil 4 remake being flown out to Capcom to exchange game development tips, and obviously the multiple nuances of Christian Whitehead and Simon Tomley being able to develop Sonic Mania. I will always be happy about them. I guess as someone who, for better or for worse, is a Sonic fan, I just kind of get a little iffy because people just, they make it sound like Sega hired these people off the street, when in reality, these are people who not only were making stuff in fan communities since like probably the late 90s, but had to build up rapport starting in like the early 2010s.
Right.
I wish it were that easy, but again, not a lot of people are fanatics. I guess my only other point in regards to not just Smash but Nintendo as a whole, like I feel like with the industry as a whole, like more people are slowly being aware of just how kind of totalitarianism all companies can be to some extent.
Sure.
I feel like the way multiverses ended up is probably for a lot of people is going to be the big waking up as to how games as a service isn't great. There's no end of life plan to let people still play your game.
Right.
Taking away digital assets that you've like paid money for, on many streaming services and stuff like that. A lot of people are waking up and a lot of people are seeing these as like connected issues. But in regards to Nintendo, I feel it's really frustrating when a lot of people will come together on certain issues like, virtual console availability, lack of preservation for limited releases, debatable quality of limited releases. But when it's the Melee scene, people will let their opinions of the game or the community overshadow and just say, oh, well, these people deserve to be screwed over. And to me, it just always seems unfair. Like, look, I myself have never played a Splatoon game in my life. I will be there when the Splatoon people get screwed over because they were there for, Melee and Ultimate people when they got screwed over,
Right.
It's all intersectional for a lack of better words, obviously. And I think my final point, I don't know if you're personally familiar with the Kit and Krista, their podcast. I think they formerly worked at Nintendo of America or the Treehouse, something similar.
I actually watched that video. I think I left a comment on that video too. But
yeah, I'll have to find that. But yeah, like it just so mystifying that, apparently like we as players just like we care too much about this game, and any alternative to like an official release would just not satisfy us. So it's better to just not only not try at all, but actively go against people doing it our way. So it's like we can't win. I don't think past 64 being on the virtual console there's ever really been Smash games ever being re-released, and you can't even play 64 on your Switch officially. So again, whole other potential conversation for another time. But to sum up my final thoughts, and none of this is going to sound new, obviously, a lot of these companies can make wonderful things, but the way that they treat people, especially people who are paying customers, is really unfair. But because that we love the product, the piece of media, more than company themselves, I feel like that more often will shine. And we see that with the way we both enjoy the game, the way that your work is obviously transformative. I don't feel like there's always gonna be passionate artistic fans, and I feel like that passion will never die, and there's always overshadow um just plain consumerism, which is probably what these companies want.
Right.
But creativity will always overcome and outshine, and I'm very optimistic for the future.
Yeah, likewise. And I do think one final note on that is the unfortunate fact of the matter is Nintendo being able to just make a new Smash game, or if they, because there's been talks about another sequel to Ultimate coming out potentially. It is literally a money factory for them. So as a company and a brand and a business, I don't blame them for seeing the dollar signs on the wall and being like, wow, this is a way for us to be really rich from something like this, and that's awesome. But at the same time, the reason that people get really frustrated, and the reason that I get really frustrated, is there are so many talented people in the community who are doing the equivalent of free to very, very low wage labor because it is a labor of love.
Fizzy.
Yeah, Fizzy, I mean, and his team made the entire framework behind rollback netcode, which is literally better online than Ultimate, the newer game. And that's like sad if you're a competitive player. But I think about people like Vancity Primal is a good friend of mine as well, who made the Animele skin pack, and then like the implications of things like that. Vancity, as another example again, made an entire game mode a couple weeks ago or a month ago. He made a King of the Hill game mode, which is sick. It's an awesome mod, but you look at that and you're like, well, damn, I don't know if I can even show this because Nintendo might get mad about it. And that's the part that really frustrates me, because again, I think if Nintendo were a more modernized company that was more in touch with their fan base, they would see something like that and be like, well, let's bring these guys on to what we're doing and let's make some money together, because that's like an easy win for everyone right there. It helps perpetuate this game forward through time, which allows more people to appreciate it, more people to become exposed to it. And it also helps the company because they just get labor that they don't have to pay for as much as they would for their normal employees, and they get these sweet ass things as a result of it. It's just so it's
an inevitable great PR. Again, we're still talking about Sonic Mania, and it's almost been like 10 years.
Yeah, and it's just like the further implications of all of this are just so crazy. Like, you think about if the company's end goal is to make money, right? Like the idea of someone like Vancity Primal who can make these skin packs, an entire cosmetic restructuring of a game that came out in 2001. And then you sit down and you think about it and you're like, if I'm Nintendo, I can look at that and say, wow, I can do microtransactions on games like this. And that's the reason, or a big reason, why games like Brawlhalla have been able to perform so well over time, because they have partnerships with like Disney and crazy companies, which is just absurd to think about, where you're like, I can play as Anakin Skywalker in Brawlhalla and fight against Master Chief, and then also like Negan from The Walking Dead is there too for some reason. That's crazy to think about. And the fact that I think that Nintendo just either chooses or will not capitalize on something like that is just, again, I circle back to the word disappointment, because it just is disappointing. There's just so much untapped potential, and the idea of what could have been for a game that so many people love is still kind of lingering in the air, like the carrot dangling on a stick there.
Absolutely. If there were an official like emulation setting for PC, I'd pay $60 for just a legal untouched Melee ISO.
Sure.
That's money that they can make, but but honestly, that's another separate conversation. I won't. You've been a great guest, and it's been great to, just like, pick the brain of someone who's like much more pivotal in this community. It's been great talking with you.
Thank you.
Before we finally close out, where can people keep up with you?
Yeah, the big platform that I want to push for this year is going to be YouTube, of course. I'm aiming for the silver play button by the end of 2024. So we are about just under 20,000 away from that. So I think it is definitely doable depending on how we get there. But otherwise, I'm on Twitter. It's all the same, at Turndownforwalt, Turndownforwalt on YouTube. And I think it's Turndownforwalt official on TikTok and Instagram because someone took my username and I can't get it back. So
Oh my God.
that's where I'm at with that one. But yeah, those are my spots. I have a Patreon as well if people are interested in supporting me. That was a huge help, especially when I went through the career change earlier in 2023.
Right.
So yeah, again, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
No problem. Thank you for agreeing to come on. Like, we've been trying to set this up for a long time now, and it was definitely worth the wait.
Yeah, absolutely, man.
So I will finally sign off. As I elaborated in my previous episode, I am now on Patreon myself, patreon.com/A2Adam. At the moment, it is solely updates about this podcast, but if you support for either $2 or $5, you'll have your name in the credits of any future video projects. You have early access to podcast episodes, potential bonus episodes, and you'll be able to know guests and ask them questions before I make public posts. Thank you again very much for coming on this show. And you can keep up with me. I have a card, a2adam.carrd.co. It is just a link tree that has everything until my official website is finally completed. That'll be the ongoing lore of this podcast going forward. But yes, Walt, it has been great having you, and I will finally sign off. I've been Adam. Oh, no, sorry.
Oh,
no,
is this my turn?
Yes.
Oh,
yes.
This is my turn. Okay. Hey,
Yes.
what's up? I'm Turndownforwalt.
and we will both catch you next time. Remember to stay safe, take care, wear a mask, and remember, love and peace always. Take care.
See you guys.